Thanks for tuning in to our top 50 games of all time.
These are going to be recorded as video for our YouTube channel.
You can check that out at youtube.com/boardgamebarrage.
They say the truth is a number one stopper. They say you think, but you never want to speak up. They say you're hot and there you be safe, but what's on your mind, kid? What's on your mind, kid? They say out loud there will never be me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 50 of the Board Game Barrage. That's 50.
We made it.
For almost one whole year, we have been doing this podcast every week. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
It's remarkable that we haven't killed Mark yet.
Yeah, exactly. We've made it this far without anyone dying. This week, we are going to be continuing our 5-part series of our top 50 board games of all time. If you made it with us this far, we are at the 10 best games of all time.
Ever made.
Top 10.
So that means there'll be 30 games covered today, and about 10 of them are good. I think there's some crossover, but
yeah, right. So
only
slightly
10.
Only 10, yeah, and none of the other ones mentioned. If you're not familiar with us, we're Board Game Barrage. We're a podcast. We release anywhere podcasts are released. That's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, anywhere like that. Please check us out. We release every single Thursday. We're also on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like what we do. Please tell your friends. We appreciate any and all of the support you guys give us. It's been awesome having you all along with the ride for us. Let's get right into it. Kalen, do you want to start us up with your number 10?
I do. My list has been filled with party games and fillers, so I wanted to set the record straight here. My number 10 best game of all time is the heavyweight Coloretto.
That is a deep strategic game.
That's right. That it is. Coloretto is a very, very small card game. It's probably my most played board game of all time. What I love about it is that it is a super beautiful small box card game that plays really well from 2 to 4 players. Essentially, you're collecting sets of chameleons, but you only score for 3 of them. So if you have 4 good sets of chameleons, that's actually bad because you score negative points for any set after the first 3. And the mechanism by which you acquire those chameleons is really, really simple and straightforward. There are hops on the table. You can either take a hop full of chameleons and be out for the round, or you can draw a card and add it to one of the hops. So this adds a press your luck element where you're sort of trying to figure out, I really want this blue chameleon, but I could add a new card to it, and it could be the orange chameleon that I want. But if you make a hop too valuable, then another player at the table will take that chameleon pile from you, and you'll be sad. This game is also expanded really well with variant cards that change how you do end scoring. This is sort of a legacy. It's not a legacy game. It's a legacy game on my list, given that I played it for many, many years. And its mechanism is cribbed and stolen and used in games like Aquaretto and Zularetto. But Coloretto is the small, best version of this. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah, this was higher up, lower down on my list, I should say. It's a few episodes back. You should remember, like me mentioning it. Yeah, I love Coloretto too. It's a fantastic game.
It is better than Biblios. My number 10, Coloretto.
Okay. So with that little bit of blasphemy out of the way, let me get to my number 10 game of all time. My number 10 game is a party game. This is True Colors. This is very similar to a game that I mentioned earlier on my list, Scruples. What you do in True Colors is you have a question that is asked to the group, and the questions are usually about some trait that somebody in the group has. It may be like, if your computer is broken, who here do you call? They do get a little darker. The example that I always like to use is one that we had where the question was, you're on a long plane flight, who around the table do you least want to be sitting next to?
Mark.
So you get the vibe there. And what you're doing is you are voting for people around the table, and you get 2 votes. If you think that it sort of applies to 2 people around equally, you give them each a vote. So if I think it's sort of Neilan, sort of Kalen, I could put 1 red and 1 orange vote in. But if you really think it's somebody, then you can double vote for them. And then the votes are thrown in a black box, they're shuffled around, and then they're revealed. And that reveal is a very fun, sort of exciting part because, you see like orange, red. And then depending on the question, obviously, the type of tension that you experience is different, But what I love about True Colors is, and sort of the same thing that I like about Scruples, is it provides a bit of safe friction to the group you're in. It poses uncomfortable questions, but in a way that is structured, that everybody sort of agrees with because we're all playing the game, and it allows you to sort of learn about the group, learn maybe parts about the group that you hadn't understood before. Parts of your friends that maybe they see you as the guy they would turn to if they had a computer issue or a life issue, and you don't know that, or maybe you think you are that person and you're not at all according to them. So it's just, for a game that comes off as very divisive and very like potentially fight inducing, I've never had, even the game where we had the question come up, who would you not want to sit next to on a plane, and we voted for the girl who'd invited us to her house, which is very awkward. But even in that game, I've never had a game of True Colors end where I think everybody didn't enjoy themselves or didn't like feel something. I just always feel like after a game of True Colors, your friend group gets closer.
Right. Even at its most uncomfortable, you just feel like like you said, you're growing as a group.
Yeah. And so we played this at BarageCon 2. I think everybody had a great time. It was illuminating. Well, I think
we learned a lot about
excuse me, Neilan. You learned that people thought I was better at technology than you.
That is
and you were salty. You were very salty about that.
So that is my number 10 game of all time, True Colors.
My number 10 game of all time is Dominion. This is the original deck building game, and this is designed by Donald Vaccarino. So if you're familiar with deck building, that's not the same as collectible card games, deck construction. So something like Magic the Gathering, where you're pre-constructing a deck. The premise of a deck builder is that you're building your deck over the course of playing the game. If you're not familiar with Dominion, you might be familiar with this mechanic from Clank or Aeon's End. They've all borrowed the same system, essentially. So the way Dominion works is that you have a starting deck of 10 cards. You draw a hand of 5. You play as many of them as you can. Some of those will allow you to buy more cards. You add those to your deck. That'll allow you to buy bigger and better cards, and this just keeps going so that you're building a better and better deck as you go. So it's got this sort of element of engine building to it, and one of the things that's the most interesting about that is by themselves, the cards that allow you to draw more cards or do more things aren't necessarily scoring you points. So at some point in the game, you're going to have to pivot towards getting victory point cards. But these victory point cards don't actually do anything for your deck. They're kind of just dead weight, so you have to time it just right so you're not getting too many of those early on. One of my favorite things about Dominion is it has huge replayability. So just in the base box, you have a whole bunch of cards, and you only choose a subset of them to play with every single time. And when you start layering on all the expansions, there just become so many cards to choose from. And that means that every single game you play, you're playing with a completely different set, and it makes for a completely different game. Yeah. It's so variable, and you could, given how many expansions there are for it right now, and I haven't tried half of them, there's that many. This is one of the earliest games I came to when I started playing board games about 7 years ago, and it's still incredible. It's one of those games where I wish I owned every single expansion for it, right, just to mix and match, but it's just a silly proposition at this point. But you can't go wrong, honestly, with just the base box. Even if you've played the deck builder, I would still recommend Dominion. Something about the purity of it is still so incredible. Yeah, that's Dominion.
I mean, I totally appreciate Dominion and its legacy, and it's important to the hobby. My only problem with it is the same problem I have with Agricola, which is that the only time that I've played it is with people who've played it quite a bit, right, which is what you're going to run into with a game as classic as Dominion. And Dominion, one of the best qualities of it is that it plays very quickly. So when I played it, the couple times I've played it, it was like, one guy was like play, and then when it got to me, just like the game slowed down, and I was like the odd man out, and it was just like boom, boom, slow, boom, boom, slow. And so it was just a little, and they knew the game really well. And and I was playing with Dan, who is notorious for like
that's funny, because I was going to say that sometimes I have the opposite problem with Dan, where I have a very quick turn, you feel like you don't do anything, and then Dan runs his whole deck every single turn. You're just like, oh god, Dan, are you still playing? Right. You need to be here for this. Right. Those overweighted sort of games can happen, but like I still feel like it's still fun.
Yes, yeah.
There's something about just like the personal engineering of your deck,
especially if you're coming to this game, with your gaming group at the same time. Then it's peers, there's exactly.
That's my number 10 game, Dominion.
Dominion's real good. I think it got a lot of love. Like Catan came out and made a big splash, and then I think Dominion was responsible for bringing a lot of people back into board gaming. My number 9, best game of all time, is a game from 1959. So that's older than all of us.
Just barely
missed me. Mark's count. This is Diplomacy. Diplomacy is probably the best game that the two of you have never played. Diplomacy is known as the friendship killer. So that sounds fun, right? In Diplomacy, you play one of the great powers of Europe. The game is a minimum of 6 hours long, and the game consists of rounds of 15 minutes. So during those 15 minutes, you leave the table, and you're allowed to go talk to anyone you want to in private. And then by the time that timer runs out, which can be up to 15, it can be however long you want it to be, but 15 is probably the max you should do. At the end of that timer, everyone has to have submitted written orders for what their troops will do. It's a very, very simple game, probably simpler than Risk even in how the troops move and support. If you have more troops, you win a battle, but you must have support from other players in order to beat someone else. This game is the closest thing to Survivor that I have ever seen in a board game. You will spend hours in a room with 2 or 3 or 4 people promising each other the world, looking deep into their eyes and saying, we're in it to win it, we're in it together, it's us versus them, and you must betray them. and they must betray you, and it's just a question of when that will happen. This game is emotionally devastating, honestly. Yeah. There's just no other way to say it. People leave, you can get kicked out, you can lose. And usually when you lose, you just leave because you're so upset as to what has transpired. You've spent hours building something with a group of people, and then boom, you're out. It's so cool. There's so much meta game going on, strategy about who's talking to who. One of my craziest things for me is that I experience paranoia in this game. So Mark is in my alliance, but then suddenly Mark is talking to Neilan. Mark, why are you talking to Neilan? And, if paranoia is not bad, well, then suddenly I'm threatening him. And I'm saying, if I see you with him again, it's over. I'm taking you out in the winter, dude. Don't even look at him.
Right.
Just submit your orders. Okay, fine. You can talk to him as long as your orders are in. If they're on the table, fine. Go talk to Neilan. But until then, no. This is a game I can only play once every 6 months. I bring Advil intentionally. It gives you a headache. I think every gamer should try this at least once. You'll be shocked at the experience that you have. There is nothing like it. My number 9 best game of all time is Diplomacy.
I can't wait to play this.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
We have to.
But
I'm going to get wrecked.
I love the physicality of it. I love the fact that your presence, your actual where you are affects the game. Like you're saying, you can threaten. If I even see you hanging around somebody, physically hanging around somebody, it's over. I think it's great. And you've mentioned the fact that there's a single map, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you don't want people to strategize too closely, you can just stand by the map and not move. And I'll be like, can you move so we can talk? And you just, no.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm excited.
That's Diplomacy.
My number 9 game of all time is higher on somebody's list.
Oh.
So I will be getting back to that when it is called out. But
you're not as passionate about it as someone, man.
I've got so much passion in these higher numbers that,
Save that passion for later.
That's right.
Does the church allow that kind of passion, Mark?
Okay, then let's go to my number 9. My number 9 game of all time is Gods of Atlantis. Mark mentioned this in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
We love Gods of Atlantis as a group. To very quickly sum up what it is, if you're familiar with the video game genre of MOBAs, multiplayer online battle arenas, that's games like Dota or League of Legends, this is a board game that attempts to replicate that. So basically every player plays as one of a bunch of different specialized heroes. Each of those heroes has different abilities, different focuses, and you're sort of moving down the lane towards the enemy player's base, moving around this map, killing their enemy minions, sort of just trying to push the battlefield towards their end of the map. So it becomes a sort of tug of war as you're sort of killing minions and moving back and forth. As you're doing that, you're collecting experience, gold in the case of Gods of Atlantis. You're leveling up, getting better cards, and getting more stronger abilities. The way this plays out is through this really cool sort of simultaneous card selection mechanic where basically you go, okay, step 1, everyone choose a card. Everyone chooses a card, they play it face down in front of them, then everyone reveals at the same time. Then in order of the initiative, which is printed on the card, you just execute that action. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to use this ability, so I moved my guy to here. Player 2, who is the next on the initiative list, they're going to do this move where they're going to kill a minion. And you just keep going around like that until everyone's executed their move, and then you do it again. So it's a very simple system. It plays mostly fast. I think it would benefit from sort of having a timed mechanism to it, maybe a player timer, just to limit how much time you can spend deliberating. But other than that, it moves pretty quickly, and it's a pretty slick experience. It has all the highs and lows of the MOBA genre, which I really, really like. It's a game that sort of emphasizes team killing and coordination. It's the closest thing to something like a sport I can think of, at least the video game version is, where positioning matters so much. You sort of have to flank and sort of collaborate with your team to execute these team kills. When you're sort of like running on sort of like all cylinders as a team, it's just hugely satisfying to execute really good sort of combos. I think it's a game that sort of, when you were playing with the right people and you have really two strong teams are pitted against each other and going back and forth like that, it goes really, really well. That maybe runs counter to Mark's first game of it.
Right, and because this was on my top 50 list. You talk about how closely it mirrors the MOBA video game genre and all the benefits or all the reasons why that's so great. I came to this game as a person who had heard of MOBAs but had never played one, and I had like the worst game of Guards of Atlantis like you could possibly ever imagine. My one and only kill came on my last turn in a match that we lost like an hour before.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I still like put it again on my top 50 games of all time because, like you said, I sort of gravitate towards sports in general, and you're very correct in saying that this is like a sports sort of has a lot of same. You have to construct your team in a way that sort of works out well. You know, you want to have a good mix or a mix that benefits one facet of your game, and positioning and timing and teamwork is so key, and that that's a rare thing to find in a board game. So I
don't think it's any surprise that these games, the video games, have been as successful as they've been, like even as spectator sports, and I think it translates really, really well. That is my number 9 game, Guards of Atlantis.
My number 8 best game of all time is higher on someone else's list. Ooh. So I kind of want to make up a segue, but that's dumb. So we'll get there when we get there.
Okay. So my number 8 game of all time, I sort of have 2 games in this spot. Officially, my number 8 game of all time is Brass Birmingham, but I could have had Brass Lancashire here too. They sort of jockey for the position, and I just thought I just have the one. So this is the only 2018 game on my list, which is also sort of a cheat because it's a reworking of an earlier game by Martin Wallace, Brass. So why do I love Brass? Brass blends so many mechanisms together that I like already, and it does it in such a tight, integrated way. It's got route building, it's got engine building, it's got hand management, and it's got an economic simulation, which are all parts of games that I love, and it just blends them so well together. It's a medium to heavy Euro, but the turns are very simple. All you do is you have 10 cards, and on your turn you're playing 2 cards and drawing 2 cards. The cards that you play dictate the actions you can do, but at its core, it's just a very simple, straightforward game that offers, again, all these different mechanisms that are interesting and that I enjoy. Another thing that I like about this game is that it really rewards tempo because you're building these lines. You're building either canals or railroads, depending on which age you're in. The game takes place in 2 halves that represent the canal age and the rail age. And you're sharing resources and you're sharing infrastructure with your opponents. So Neilan or Kalen may have built canals or rails, but I can use them. I mean, they gain benefits that are unique to them for having built them, but the shared use of infrastructure is fundamental to this game. And that's where the tempo comes in, because you may want to build a cotton mill or something, but if you do that now, you're maybe losing out on the opportunity to jump ahead at something else. So that tempo, that like timing, is such a big part to this game, and I love games that reward that, don't allow you to just like do anything you want anytime you want, that where timing is a key ingredient to the way you play. And again, just to reiterate, the sharing of infrastructure is so key to this game. You're building either, again, the lines that everybody's sharing, or coal mines or ironworks. And those are resources that you want to expend yourself. You want to be the person who's using the coal in your coal mine or the person using the iron in your iron mine. But you don't really mind if other players do, because once those mines or those ironworks are emptied, you score points. So again, it's just the way that everything's integrated. All these mechanisms, all these like interactions with your opponents, it blends together really, really well. And that's my number 8 game, Brass Birmingham. I think with time, I may move Brass Lancashire higher on the list because it's a little bit of a less forgiving game, and I sort of like that about it. But for right now, at least for the novelty, I'm going to have Brass Birmingham as my number 8 game of all time.
I think of like the heavy Euros that have been released recently. This is the one I'm the most excited to try.
Yeah.
Birmingham specifically, I think.
Right.
I also want to encourage, if you haven't seen
yes.
the art of like the most recent version, like the board it has the unusual color scheme to it.
It's this deep, lush black. It's like evocative of the coal industry. Yeah.
It's a really unique look.
And just to touch on that a little bit more, is the production art aside, the art is great. The components are fantastic. It's got these really heavy poker chips that are used for the currency, these iron clays that are just wonderful. So the entire production of the 2018 reprint is fantastic. That's my number 8 game of all time, Brass Birmingham.
Cool. My number 8 game of all time, I'm surprised our intern hasn't flagged this as being higher on your list, Kalen. It's Scythe.
Oh, yeah.
That's a mistake. We'll get back.
Yeah, we'll edit this out. I'll get it in there.
Scythe is Jamie Stegmaier's sort of Kickstarter darling from about 2 or 3 years ago. It is one of the earliest sort of Euro Ameritrash hybrids. I know that's a bit of a loose definition of a hybrid because I think it definitely leans much harder towards the Euro end of the spectrum. In Scythe, you sort of are paying as in the base game at least, one of 5 different competing asymmetric factions for sort of control of the sort of post-war territory. There's sort of a factory in the center of the board that gives you sort of newer and better cards. But otherwise, you're sort of spreading out across these hexes, getting resources, building mechs, creating buildings, and sort of just taking control of the territory. The thing that sort of I like about Scythe is it has this pretty novel sort of action selection system where you have a board that's semi-randomized of 4 different pairings of top and bottom actions. So you pick one of those 4 spots. You can't do the same one on 2 subsequent turns, and then you do both the top action, and then the bottom action. But each of these actions is sort of covered by these little components that move around whether you upgrade them. So you might sort of take a cube from the top row and move it to the bottom row, and that makes the top row more effective and the bottom row cheaper. Right. So it's one of those things where it's just rewarding to sort of move these pieces and realize you're just improving your player board effectively. It's a really cool system, and that's one of the things I sort of can't stress highly enough about Scythe is from an interface perspective. That's not something I say about board games very often, but it's just got such a nice tactile little user interface to it, where as you move these pieces around, you're sort of just making your player board more satisfying to use. More than that, it's got this really cool vibe where it's not a heavy conflict game. It's a game that's more about representing a Cold War. So the threat of combat is sort of a bigger deal than combat itself. So as you're sort of spreading on throughout the map, you're encroaching on other people's territories, and there just becomes a sort of slight risk of, well, I don't want to push towards that, or I might be attacked. It's not a game that sort of extensively rewards combat, and in fact, combat can be quite punishing if you're at the losing end of it. So it just becomes this very delicate sort of balance of sort of trying to spread out as much as you can and not impede other people's territory as much as possible. One of the other things I sort of have to say about Scythe is just how incredible its production values are. The artwork is beautiful. It's very evocative of the setting. It's sort of this pastoral theme with sort of this steampunky mech vibe it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. And the cards are just sort of chock full of this art, and it's beautiful to look at. I think it's a very unique setting, and one that I think is represented by the mechanics quite effectively. Yeah, that's Scythe. The other thing I sort of want to stress about it is the reason it's maybe so high up on my list this year is because the campaign expansion, The Rise of Fenris, that came out in 2018, is one of the best board game experiences I've had. I only played it as a 2-player game, and it's a pretty short campaign of about 8 scenarios. But the way that sort of it reveals mechanics as you play through it is just, I found really rewarding. It's kind of got that legacy edge of you're opening boxes, you're revealing new things as you play. So if you've had Scythe for a while and maybe you're just looking for a way to sort of spice up, reinvigorate your interest in it, then I'd definitely recommend the Rise of Fenris expansion.
Scythe, what I wanted to say was that Scythe was a wolf in sheep's clothing, but what Scythe actually is a sheep in wolf's clothing. And what I mean by that is Scythe is a Euro efficiency engine with all the trappings of a war, fighty, dudes on a map game. It's a Euro game for those who want to pretend that they enjoy conflict in their board games.
That's Neilan.
And that's Neilan. Neilan is 100% correct. This is probably the best production of any board game I've ever seen, ever, and experienced. Tactically, the UI of it, as it were. Scythe is so close to a game that I would love, but it just gates you and restricts what you can do on the board in a very Euro-ish way. So when you look at the game, I want to do so much, and I can imagine so much, but then I can't actually do any of it. And that pushes it off of my top 50. It's such an interesting game, and it's so very close. I want to try the Rise of Fenris. I know there's some modules that make it a little more warlike. Curious what that does, but Scythe, man, it's just so close.
I think that's also not unfair, because I think there is certainly a danger of someone looking at the box and seeing the mechs and thinking it's a very different, more Ameritrashy game. I think my sort of counter to that is my interpretation of the art has always been like it's like, you know, it's these threats looming in the background of these pastoral scenes. It's more about, like I said, the looming threat of combat. And that's a pity, because you're right, it doesn't necessarily convey itself that way, but yeah, definitely is what it is. That's my number 8 game of all time, Scythe.
My number 7 best game of all time is Trois. Heavy Euro, boys. There it is.
That's the one.
What? The one? Have you been listening?
Oh, yeah, Coloretto. That's right.
Yeah,
So two.
thank you,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Trois is a fantastic dice drafting game. It is a heavy-ish Euro game where every decision in the game is super agonizing, and everything that you do impacts every other player on the board. I have no idea what the theme is. I think it's in a castle, and you roll a bunch of dice, and those are your dice, and you start planning what you want to do with those dice on your turn, except everyone else can buy your dice from you, and you have no choice but to accept their offer. So you roll the dice, you start getting excited about what's going to happen, and then you realize about halfway in that, oh no, I'm not going to get to do that. Right. And that's horrifying. In addition to that, there's spaces on the board where you want to make sure that you stay. It sort of goes in a row where someone comes in and then the person who's been there the longest leaves. So you're constantly not wanting your opponents to go to those places that you're in.
Right.
The game also features wildly different power cards that come out, which are military. There are white cards, there are yellow cards, and the combination of those cards is what you're trying to exploit with the dice each game. And so because of that, there's a large variety to how the game plays. In addition, it has secret victory point cards. And one of the things I love most about this is that you get a secret card that tells you what will score points at the end of the game, but everyone at the table scores those points along with you. So it allows you to sort of look at what everyone is doing and try to decide, why is Mark collecting money? And should I also be doing that too? And I love that added little tension. Trois is just a fantastic game where you never get to accomplish everything you want to. You're sort of strategizing with your dice, figuring out how to use them best, and then getting them bought out from under you. It's great. You guys like Trois?
I do. I mean, I feel maybe we should re-record this, but you've been mispronouncing it. It's Troy's.
Stop doing that.
That's a classic Trois joke.
It's not.
You got to make that joke.
You saw the look on my face.
Genuinely, yeah.
You keep freaking me out.
No, I love Trois. I love Trois. Just played it a couple weeks ago with other people. And it was great.
Wait, who are these other
On the
people?
boat.
Yeah, on the party boat.
On the party boat?
Yeah.
This is a Trois party. Okay.
This is one of the few Euro games I think you rave about all of the time, so I feel like I have to play it. I haven't yet, but yeah, I would really like to.
Super good. Let's do it.
Yeah, on the party boat.
On the party boat, the Trois boat at sea. My number 7 game of all time, like Brass Birmingham, which was number 8, it also blends a lot of things together. Not mechanisms in this case, but just things about gaming that I like. So this is one of the coin games. This is Cuba Libre.
That's Cuba Libre.
I was pronouncing it as the Cubans do. So what this game has that I like, it has asymmetry. It is not a capital of asymmetry. I was corrected earlier. That is definitely Cosmic Encounter, but it does have asymmetry, and it has quite a bit of asymmetry. You can play one of 4 factions. They range anywhere from the government, which is like the overpowering. They're everywhere on the board to start the game. You get funded by the American government every turn until they pull funding, which is an interesting thing that happens later in the game. But all the way down to like a counterinsurgency small faction of like terrorists, for lack of a better term, that are running around and just trying to sow insurrection wherever they can. Their numbers are small, but you're just trying to like cause chaos where you can along the board. You play the game very differently, and you have obviously much different strengths and weaknesses. So I love that about Cuba Libre. It's also got a very grand sweep. It's an epic game. It's one of the quicker and more straightforward of the coin games, which is another selling point. But still, even though it is relatively straightforward and relatively quick. These are just relative terms. Cuba Libre can clock in at 3 hours. Probably not much longer than that, but still long for a board game. But I love that. I don't mind trading in time for an epic feeling. And certainly when you're playing this game, you feel like you're experiencing a very important part of the history of this nation. And finally, and this is just something that I love about games like this, is it's just so rich in history. I spoke about this earlier with PAX Renaissance, but this is a card-driven game, and it sort of shares a lot with a game that maybe more people are familiar with, a Twilight Struggle. So these cards come up, they dictate who can take actions and when and what kind of actions, but every card, like Twilight Struggle, has a piece of history on it, of Cuban history, maybe an event or a person or something about on the card. And I just love reading the cards, learning about this part of history, but also I like the idea of this like alternate history that you're making. You know, like all these things happened, or all these people like existed and had a part to play in the Cuban Revolution in a certain way. But the way the cards come out and the way you play them, and the cards that may not come out, you know, you're sort of like making history right there on the board on your own. It's like this alternate history. I just love that. There's something about that I just really much enjoy. Another reason I think Cuba Libre is especially timely this year is that it shares a lot with one of the most popular games around right now, Root, which is a game I sort of struggle to understand Root's popularity, because it is such a, I mean, I feel like if Root was dressed up as Cuba Libre, it wouldn't maybe have the appeal it does with like the farmland animals. I guess not farmland, but like the woodland creatures that it does. But Root is basically a coin game. It's very much like Cuba Libre. So I would just say, like, if you played Root and you guys and you and your group love Root, or you're enjoying yourselves, Cuba Libre is a great next step. If you like the asymmetry of Root, if you like the idea, you know, where everybody's playing the game differently, and you want maybe to try something along the same lines, Cuba Libre is a great next step, maybe a step up in weight, but it might be scratching the itch that you are scratching with Root. So my number 7 game of all time is Cuba Libre.
What is your favorite animal faction in Cuba Libre?
That would be the Cuban, I don't know, toads. I don't know.
If only.
That's right.
I'd play that version. My number 7 game of all time is higher on someone else's list.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we will come back to it later.
My number 6 best game of all time is Time's Up.
My number 9 best game of all time is Time's Up.
That was my number 7.
We got a triple crossover.
Yeah.
Triple crossover. Time's Up is the party game that we have all collectively played the most together. Specifically, we play a version of Title Recall. So that's Time's Up Title Recall. This is a game of charades that consists of 3 different rounds. In the first round, there is a series of 40 words, let's say, and they're titles of books, movies, films, and songs. And you're allowed to give as many clues as you want, and you're allowed to do as many hand gestures as you want to get your team to guess it. And then in the second and third round, the rules change, but the words that you use stay the same. So those same words that you already guessed in a previous round come back, but now you're only allowed to say one word and do as many gestures as you want. Then in the third round, those same words come back again, but now you can't say anything, you can only make gestures. What this means is that a lot of inside jokes sort of start percolating around. Gestures that were made in the first round come back in the second and third round, but get more exaggerated. Yeah. This is incredibly silly and competitive. Our group plays this extremely competitively. Right. Perhaps more than even the heavier Euro games that we play.
That's probably true.
We are very serious about Time's Up. What do you guys like about it?
My favorite part about it, it sort of harkens to the metagame that arises. What I love about Time's Up, and what always sort of surprises me, is when somebody gets a clue in the first round of something that they just never heard of. Like, you know, you can get a pop culture title of a book, a movie you've never heard of, or a video game, or you may not even know how to pronounce the word, and yet it always works out because you know somebody can be like frustrated and looking at it and trying to figure something out and make some sort of gesture, or like maybe scratch their head in frustration, and then that head scratch becomes the clue. Yeah. And I just love that. I love that it can be gobbledygook. You know, it can be something you've never heard of, but it always works.
Right, and especially because even if you don't get it, then that word stays in the deck and will come up again.
Right.
So you'll have seen it previously to be able to maybe guess it as well. So it's a very clever system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to know anything about the words you're guessing for it to work.
Right.
It's also worth saying that I guess this is like a public domain game that's called Celebrity.
Or I've heard Salad Bowl,
Right.
or
There are a bunch of different versions of this. Monikers is another
Monikers,
one that's
yeah.
extremely popular. In whatever form you play it, it's still amazing.
Right.
Title Recall is the one I think that we would generally recommend.
Although I would say that in terms of variants that I've seen, I've played it with a couple of people who the way they play it is the first round is the same. You can say whatever you want, do whatever you want. But in the second round, they have the no speak round. They have the charade round. And then in the third round, they have it where you can say one word, which seems
That's
dumb
backwards.
to me. Yeah.
That's weird.
Do not play Time's Up that way. That's not the way to do it. Do it the way we say.
Yeah, and Time's Up is better than Monikers, in my opinion. Monikers assigns point values to different types of cards, depending on how hard the clue is. I just think it's a layer that's unneeded.
Yeah, I would agree.
For this type of party game. But if you're looking for a fun, competitive, hilarious, shouty party game, it's got to be Time's Up Title Recall.
It's the best. My
Do
number
it.
one party game for sure.
It's
Definitely.
fantastic.
Yeah. My number 6 game of all time is, again, on higher up on somebody else's list.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that.
Cool. Let's go to my number 6 game. It is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. This is a Vlaada Chvátil game. It's an extremely heavy Euro game. The thing I like about it, or at least the thing that drew me to it initially, is it's almost definitely very heavily inspired by Civilization, the video game. It's kind of like Vlaada sort of played Civilization, was like, I want to translate this into board game form, which is interesting because Civilization already exists in board game form. But this is his take on it, at least.
Right.
But Through the Ages is sort of a tableau building, very multiplayer solitaire, quite low in interaction game where you sort of have the player board that you're going to be spending most of your time just staring at, moving pieces around, sort of planning how you're going to spend your resources, what cards you're going to buy, what military units you're going to deploy, just to sort of get the leg up on your civilization over the other people at the table. So you're sort of building buildings, you're getting science developments, you're sort of acquiring new cards. All of this is sort of filtered through this sort of card row mechanic. The central mechanic are these cards you're acquiring. So there's this shared row of cards that you can purchase. And one of the biggest considerations in your turn is, well, these cards get cheaper as they progress down the card row. But if I don't buy it now, someone might steal it from me. So there's this very sort of, there's this big tension over whether you pay more to get a card earlier or whether someone will be able to take that from you before it gets cheaper. Because there's not always, for every technology, there's not always a copy for every single player in the game, which is interesting. This is sort of progresses over these 3 main ages. There's not a strong interactive component to this. The main form of competition is in the form of military. So you sort of have a military value, which is how many sort of each type of unit you have and their sort of respective strength. And you can only attack another player if your military value is significantly higher than theirs. So you're just trying to sort of keep your military numbers sort of in check with other players. Otherwise, the competition mostly comes from competing for these cards, like I said. But for the most part, it's a very sort of insular game where you're just planning out your turn as intricately and as efficiently as possible. If that sounds satisfying to you, then this is the sort of archetypal game that Kalen would sort of, negatively call a spreadsheet game where you're sort of optimizing as heavily as you could.
I mean, people really need spreadsheets, Neilan. They need them in the workplace.
That's fair. But they're also valid on the board game table, it turns out. This is one of the games, when I started playing board games, I played a whole bunch of in the physical form. I would absolutely recommend this in its digital implementation. It takes care of some of the bookkeeping for you, so all the little fiddliness. In the board game, you're sort of moving components around a lot. All of that's taken care of you in the digital form of this. I would highly recommend that. You can play this asynchronously rather than sort of playing it for 4 hours. It runs very long if you're playing it on the table. But otherwise, I would highly recommend it. If Civilization as a video game is something that you enjoy, Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization is my number 6 game of all time.
So based on a video game, they made a board game, but
Uh-huh.
you're recommending the video game adaptation. And it's the board game of all time?
Yep, that's 100% accurate.
Just making sure I understand.
I would still recommend playing the tabletop game. It's so long and I can't justify it. It's so hard to teach as well. I would still happily play the tabletop game.
But you
anytime.
You don't lose much on the digital implementation, right? It's a pretty faithful...
Oh, yeah, no, you're playing the board game.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are a couple of subtle rule changes just to handle the fact that you don't want to wait on everyone
Right,
to implement
right.
every rule. But
Okay.
yeah. That's my number 6 game.
My number 5 best board game of all time is a big one. This is El Grande.
My number 5 game of all time is also a big one. I see you did there with the big one. El Grande.
Oh, it is. We share it.
Matchup.
Crossover. Sorry, Neilan.
Direct
Yeah.
crossover.
We're holding hands. Oh, no, we're not. I can see both
Clearly
of our hands. El Grande. Why? Please. Area control is absolutely one of my favorite mechanisms, and I've played many different area control games. And the reality is, why play any of them when you can play El Grande? This is the quintessential area control game. It's so tight, so devastating on the board. You start the game with a hand of cards 1 through 12. A series of action cards come out with things that you want to do on the board. You want to do them desperately. But those set of 1 to 12 cards, you will bid to determine who gets to pick action cards first. If you bid 12, that's your best card, and you're going to get the best action out there. But you'll never get to use that 12 again for the rest of the entire game. It's agonizing trying to figure out when it's worth it to use that card. In addition, you've got an element I love called the Castillo, which is this sort of tower that everyone is dumping meeples into throughout a round. And then everyone takes a spinner and chooses one of the areas on the board to dump all of their meeples into. So you feel like you're winning the control for that one region, and then you're just desperately hoping that everyone else does not put their spinner where you don't want it to go, and you'll lose the scoring for that round. El Grande is so tight and simple. It just, every time I play a different area control game, I just wonder why we're not playing El Grande.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. A couple of things I'd also point out. When you're playing the cards, when you play a higher card, you get to select the action that you're going to take first, and you get to act first, but you trade that off because the higher cards allow for less workers to be manipulated or to be brought out onto the board. So if you play a low card, you're going to act last, but the trade-off there is that you're going to bring out more of
presence.
More presence on the board, exactly. So just that's another simple rule or simple part of the game that is so elegant but works so well. And the other part that I love about it is the king piece, which is an oversized pawn that moves around the board, and wherever the king is, you can't place workers in that area, in his region, and you can only place workers or your caballeros around his region or adjacent regions. And that's just another aspect of the game that is so simple but is so tight and so elegant. You can always take the action of moving the king. You can always select the king movement action, and that just moving of the king and blocking off further workers being placed in there and just shifting the focus, because again, when you move the king, you're shifting where all the meeples are being placed. That is just such a nice part of the game, and again, just another reason why this is like the absolute classic area control game. One of the oldest, but I think the best.
For the record, I really like El Grande a whole lot too. The only reason it's not on my list, I just haven't played it enough. I would really like to.
Yeah.
I think, like you guys said, it's whenever you play any other area control game, it's just the amount that El Grande streamlines and boils down to just the basics and the essentials of what we like about area control, I think is just, it's hard not to recognize. It's a fantastic game.
And we both have the big box. I think you have...
I've got 2 of them. That's how much I love it.
And I know the big box comes with a bunch of expansions. I've never played with any expansions because it just feels like such a pure area control game. Like, why would you want to? But I've heard the expansions are good, so I certainly am not against trying them out. And if you guys have played with the expansions and have any recommendations, I'd be happy to hear. But it's just such a great pure area control game. That's our number 5. High five for number 5. Look at that.
He didn't see my grimace. He will when he watches it.
Okay, my number 5 game of all time is A Feast for Odin. I believe this was earlier in Mark's list as well. This is my favorite of the Uwe Rosenberg farming style games. I like Agricola a whole lot. It was earlier on my list. A Feast for Odin is something special, though. It has that sort of patchwork element laid in, where you're sort of collecting goods in the form of tiles that you use to cover this board. So at the start of the game, this board is just filled with negative points, and the more that you cover by the end of the game, well, the less negative points you have. So the game is Viking themed, and it seems to sort of do this wholehearted sort of representing all aspects of Viking living. You're getting food for feasts, you're sort of hunting, you're whaling, you're pillaging, you're collecting goods and sort of trading them for others. And that's kind of the chief mechanic, is that you have these small tiles that you're then sort of converting into other bigger tiles or flipping them over so that they're easier to place, so that you can get more and more of these Tetramino type pieces to cover more and more of your board. There are a bunch of different strategies that are successful in A Feast for Odin. That's kind of one of the things I like about it. It has this massive worker placement board. I think there are about 60-something spots on the board. And that can seem overwhelming, but it just gives you this sort of breadth of options. It feels very much like a sandbox in how many different ways you can play it. You might go a completely, You might ignore feeding and emigrate your people. You might pillage instead of hunting at all. There's just a bunch of different ways you can play it, and every single time you play it, you want to try a different route. I really, really enjoy this. It's a big, big game that's sort of quite hard to teach and also takes a huge amount of time, but I really enjoy playing it every single time.
I just imagine Uwe Rosenberg sort of going, people love Agricola and there's 15 action spaces. So what would make them love it even more? 60 different places.
Right.
The Feast for Odin is fine. I believe it sort of embodies a philosophy of modern Euro design that I dislike, which is sort of and the kitchen sink. Everything is in this game. There's so many options. It's very, very wide, which is not something that I personally prefer. But the Tetris puzzle is really cool, and I've been itching to try it at least one more time.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's all of the appeal for me is that, like you said, the width of it. And the thing is, I also don't think that the number of action spaces, as overwhelming as it seems at the start, is that bad. They're sort of loosely categorized into groups. It definitely takes a long time to explain everything, but I feel like most people get it.
But I was going to say, do you think it's that? I remember finding out it was coming out. I remember when like the initial reviews came out and they were talking about the 60 spaces, and I just thought to myself, this is just going to be such an overwhelming game to learn or teach. I don't think it's that complicated.
No, I actually don't think so either.
Yeah,
I think it's like, time consuming to
teach
because you literally have to go through every space.
Right.
I feel like it's a long teach, but it doesn't take that much to understand.
Yeah. I would say if if you've played Agricola or Caverna or these kind of games, you should feel comfortable in approaching Feast for Odin. It's certainly not going to be,
Yeah, it's overwhelming in terms of amount of stuff, but not in terms of depth of rules.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That
is my number 5 game of all time, A Feast for Odin.
My number 4 best game of all time comes with a preamble. I just need to get this out there that I hate Cthulhu. I don't want to hear about it. The horrors beyond the deep. This is similar to Mark's distaste for steampunk. These Cthulhu people, just stop. It's not cool. It's like public domain. We get it. Blah, blah, blah. My number 4 best game of all time is Cthulhu Wars. This is the $200 miniatures game with Cthulhu. Giant miniatures roaming the map. Cthulhu Wars is an asymmetric dudes on a map game that has nailed asymmetry for me. The base game comes with 4 factions, and these factions play wildly differently. The heart of this system is 6 different spells that each faction has, and they can unlock them in any order that they choose. And what that allows you to do is the asymmetry actually empowers you to make different choices rather than forcing you down one pathway. So the way that you play a game as Cthulhu could change from game to game, or the way that you play a game as the Yellow Sign or the Crawling Chaos faction. It also has a bunch of expansions, and each expansion is just a new faction that changes how the game is played. And what I love is we could play a 3-player game of Cthulhu Wars without one of the base factions, but with a new faction in there, and that's going to change a lot of the feeling and flavor of the game, because the game comes with a strategy guide, which is 1 page on how to play your faction, and then 1 page on how to play against any specific faction.
Yeah, right.
You've got to be actively engaged in stopping each player's power. Cthulhu Wars has a ton of dice. It has a ton of abilities. The base core is an action point system where you have to spend action points to do things, and you want to do them towards the end of the round and sort of pass and do little things so that you have free reign of the board. It has just enough tightness and control to what you can do, and then chaos ensues on the board. So it allows for enough actions on the board, but it's not just complete madness. It's not complete Ameritrash. There's something there that it's more than the sum of its parts. I'm surprised that this game works. I love Cthulhu Wars.
This is another triple crossover, right?
This is on all of us lists, yeah.
I stayed away from Cthulhu Wars for a long time, and I don't think I would have ever played it if not for your evangelizing of it, because when I saw it, I saw the big price tag, I saw the dice, I saw the huge minis. I just thought it was like one of these, for lack of a better term, like Kickstarter games that you see nowadays, that it's just like it's all flash and there's nothing to it. And I just thought it was like a, roll dice and your big mini hits another big mini, and just like there wasn't substance there. But everything you're saying is absolutely correct. It's certainly not a Euro, but the Euro-ish, the action point allotment thing, a part of it is fantastic. I mean, the underlying game is just super, super solid. you are chucking a lot of dice, which is a visceral, like, fun thing. But because you're rolling so many dice, that mitigates how much they can affect your play. You know, it's not like you're rolling 2 dice and a bad roll will mess you up.
It's always a ton.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a fantastic game. Absolutely.
I think, like you, I was sort of surprised that it wasn't as gimmicky as it looks when
Yeah.
you see it, because you see these giant plastic miniatures. But like, I think it's worth stating that that's a big part of why the game works, because just visually, you have these small monsters and you move them around and it's not that big deal. And then someone takes their giant, huge, like, old one and just like marches across the board, and that's a big thing.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
oh my god, I'm coming for you now because my giant hunk of plastic is now here instead of there.
That is such a good point, because, like, yeah, you're playing and you're sort of considering your next move, and you look up and maybe, like, Neilan has moved one of his little cultists, and you're like, okay, whatever, he moves his cult, I don't care. But then you look up and Kalen is moving his, like, huge old one, and then you're like, okay, wait a second, whatever I was thinking about, I've got to reconsider. Right. That is a big move, both physically a big move, but also, like, it's like a dangerous thing that has happened. It affects gameplay. It's great.
It's very opportunistic. It's always it gets to your turn and you look around and say, what can I screw over right now?
Right.
And in that way, it feels a little less hatey than some of the other games, just because everyone is doing what is most opportunistic for them at any given time in a Euro-y, efficiency-ish sort of way, but it's so funny. And Cthulhu has like a submerge ability where you can go underwater and then just appear anywhere. There's just so many funny moments. What a great story that evolves over the game. That is Cthulhu Wars, my number 4 best game of all time.
My number 4 best game of all time is very much like Cthulhu Wars. It is 1830. No. Well, my number 4 game is not anything like Cthulhu Wars. Maybe, both very good games. But mine is 1830, Railways and Robber Barons. It's sort of interesting because the designer of this game is the guy who designed Civilization, the board game. This is Francis Tresham.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is the original train game. This is the train game that other train games are sort of built upon. If you know 1830, you're going to be okay with most 18XX games. I previously listed 1846, which is probably these are both introductory train games. I think I would recommend for beginners 1846 a little bit more than 1830, because when it comes to train games, there are 2 phases to most of them, if not all of them. There's the operations phase and there's the stock phase. During the operations phase, you're actually running your train company, and during the stock phase, you're buying stocks in your company or other companies, trying to manipulate the market, manipulate control of the different companies. 1846 focuses on the operations phase, and it rewards a well-run company. So that's more maybe along the lines of what you would imagine a typical Euro game. You want to build the best company. The reason I like 1830, though, is because it's more of a stock manipulation game. There's certainly an operations aspect to it, and all the operations things that aspects that are in 18x games are in this one. You have to build good routes. You have to be it's a very tight game, so you want to definitely get to parts of the map or different stations before other people can, because this is a game where you can certainly be cut off. If somebody else lays track and cuts your train off, you're in for a tough situation. However, in 1830, you can sort of mitigate that because the stock part of it is such a big aspect. I like 1830 because you sort of can imagine yourself as like a tycoon baron. Sure, you care about how the way your company's running, but maybe you'll buy a company just to exploit it. You'll just like buy a company and just strip it for all its assets and dump it into the company that you care about. And so there's like that behind the scenes, like master of industry manipulation, like the person manipulating the strings behind the market. So I like that. I like the idea that you may not be good at running a system, but maybe I'll try to buy Kalen's company out, or maybe I'll somehow buy a cheap railroad, I'll buy a nice train for it, and then I'll sell that expensive train to the company I actually care about for like nothing. You can do sort of these like nefarious actions, which is something I like a lot when it comes to 1830 and games in general. I'm all for nefarious actions. So yes, 1830, Railways and Robber Barons is my number 4 game of all time. If you're interested in 18XX games, I would say 1846 first, but 1830 should be soon thereafter.
Who would make a better train bro, Neilan or me?
1846, I'm going to side with Neilan because I think he'll run the better train, but 1830 is yours because you'll screw Neilan out of his trains.
Yeah, nefarious.
Nefarious, exactly. So, my number 4, 1830, Railways and Robber Barons.
My number 4 game of all time is Codenames. This is another Vlaada Kvartal game. There's
another triple
2
crossover
in my top. Yeah.
Triple crossover.
Crossover.
Okay.
You just like saying Vlada's name.
I do. I just couldn't wait to study Blood of Puzzle again. So wait, where was this in your list?
Much higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
So
in the
then
20s.
Not for the top 10. Okay.
No.
Okay, right. So Codenames, it almost feels redundant to explain because I feel like you've probably played Codenames before.
right.
But if you haven't, you have a grid of 25 word cards arranged in a 5x5 grid, and you're divided into two teams. One person on each team is the clue giver. They know which of those words belongs to their team, and the rest of their team doesn't. Then they're going to give a clue and say, okay, I'm going to say fire and then a number 3. So that means that the clue fire correlates to 3 of the cards on the board. Then the rest of the team just tries to guess which of those cards matches that clue. Some of those cards will either be for their team, in which case great. Otherwise, you might accidentally give a point to the other team. One of the cards in the grid is a black word, and if you get that one, you immediately lose. So there's a lot of potential stress over getting the black word. You never want to give a point away. So it just becomes this really fun, trying to find the perfect clue that's going to give you just the right subset of cards without overlapping with the other team's words or the black word. It's a very clever game that rewards creativity while being so simple to explain. You can explain a game of Codenames in 5 minutes and get going, and everyone's going to love it.
Yeah.
And you're just going to have a bunch of great moments where either the clue giver gives the perfect clue, or there's this last minute guess where it might just be one word away from like the other team winning. It plays really quickly in about 20 minutes, and you're going to want to run it back over and over again. Codenames is incredible. It's my favorite party game, and yeah, can't recommend it enough if you're one of the very few that has not played it.
Yeah, and to that point, like for me, Codenames is, for lack of a better analogy, like the modern Monopoly. It's sort of like the game that you could expect to find, or should expect to find in households that aren't even not even gamers. I've brought this out with tons of non-gamers. It's always worked well. They always want to run it back. It's just a fantastic party game.
Yeah, just buy it. You know, it's $15 on Amazon.
That's true.
It's so very good.
Yeah.
All right, my number 3 best game of all time. I have frequently throughout the run of the podcast cited as my number 1 board game of all time. But after some heavy reflection, have moved it down to spot number 3. I do want to highlight here very specifically that Mark believes that Marco Polo is the king of asymmetry.
I have ceded that point. I was incorrect.
And he's been corrected.
I was corrected. I
on
can
YouTube.
be corrected.
Thank you, sir or madam, whomever you are. Cosmic Encounter is the king of asymmetry. Cosmic Encounter is a game of aliens with wacky powers where you are trying to score 5 points. That's all you're trying to do. Get on 5 other planets other than your own home planets. One of the coolest things about the game is that you can actually win in a group. So everyone at the table can win but one player. Obviously, it's better to win on your own, but it gives this looseness to the game. The game is a series of battles with hand management and cards where 2 players will play. One player is the attack, one player is the defense. One player will play an attack, the other player will play a defense card. Those numbers will be compared, and the winner wins that battle. Everyone at the table is allowed to ally with either the offense or the defense, but the attacker and the defender get to choose who's able to come on that mission with them if they so choose. It sounds really simple, and that's because it is, but there are also hundreds of unique alien powers that change the game in dramatic and ridiculous ways. There are cards that allow you to cheat and steal things from the discard pile. There are cards that say if you lose the battle, you win the battle. There are cards that say you are forced to let me on the mission. You have no choice. There are so many wacky things, bets you can make, gambles you can do. This game lives and dies by the interaction between the powers. Some powers are strictly worse than other powers in the game. And so it self-balances through everyone just shouting and laughing with each other. This is a game I played all throughout college. It's been around. It's been through many iterations. It is a fantastic social experience for board gamers, but it is primarily a social one. There's some cracks and rough edges to it that I definitely concede. We have only played this together once, I believe, and had an okay game, and I'm still trying to convince them of the genius of Cosmic Encounter. I prefer to play it with hidden blind double powers, which is insane and breaks the game in so many other ways. I know, whatever. It's so much fun. Cosmic Encounter, you should check it out if you like zany, wacky, if you're okay with literally losing through no fault of your own, and that's okay. That's the game.
I think for a rare change, I'm going to be a bit contrarian on this one because I probably played Cosmic Encounter more than you're suggesting. I played it with other groups. I played it a fair bit, actually, and it doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't always come together as much as I'd like to. I think the way you described it as being this sort of soup of random powers is just... It so depends on how those powers interact and who you're playing with that doesn't work more often than it does.
I'm not convinced you've assembled the right group of people.
That's maybe true.
We're dragging you towards us, Neilan. Come this way.
I would happily play it again with you guys at any point in time. It's certainly that game we played, even though it was a weird one, was super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I could do.
And it's Cosmic Encounter, my third favorite board game of all time.
And the capital of asymmetry,
Thank
as
you,
I've conceded.
Mark. Neil.
I do get things wrong very, very rarely, but when I do, I will concede. My number 3 game of all time was the biggest surprise on my list when I came up with it. I used that Pub Meeple website to rank every game that I ever played, and this one came out at number 3, and I was trying to figure out if that was a mistake. I tried to consider moving it down, but it deserves its spot. For me, my number 3 game of all time is Francis Drake. So this is a criminally underrepresented or under-loved, I think, game in the hobby. Generally, I don't go for flashy components, and Francis Drake doesn't have overproduced components. They're not especially flashy, but they are, as you might guess, Francis Drake is a game about the sea and seafaring and pirating and sailing and all. So the components are very evocative of that. The board is beautiful. The gunpowder barrels are little barrels. The gems are these translucent gems or little pebbles that you place around the board. It's a very rich game. Whenever I bring it out, it always makes me feel good. You have these little ships that, again, are not huge ships, but they're just really nice, crafted ships. So that's the one thing. One thing is that the table presence is beautiful. But the game itself is also very interesting. It has 2 very distinct, very different phases. The first one is where you're equipping your ship. It's the preparation phase. And what you do in that half of the game is you're equipping your boat for setting sail, which is going to happen in the second phase. What you're doing is you're traveling along a path where you're picking up resources. And that path of resources is randomized. So every round, every time you take that, you play that phase, things may show up in different areas. There may be gunpowder may happen maybe early in one round. It may come later in another, the next time you play. And what you're doing there is you're moving your marker down the path and taking that resource, but you can never backtrack. So what that means is if you really want something, if you really need, to get a lot of crew members, you may jump out and grab it, but you do that at the expense of all the other resources that you left behind. So, you may want to, really stock up and move little by little by little each round. But what you're doing there is you're just allowing other people to move ahead of you and take what you wanted. And the resources are, there's a lot of resources on the board, but they are limited. You're never going to get everything you want, even if you travel slowly. And certainly if you travel slowly around the board, you'll get a lot of resources, but probably not the ones you want. So that's great. That tension there is fantastic. I love that push and pull of should I jump out and grab what I want and sacrifice filling my ship. And then the second phase, the actual exploration, the actual where you're getting points and you're traveling along the board is also well done, because the way you do that is you've got 5, you can get more, but you have 5 discs that are numbered 1 to 4 with 1 blank. And there are different spots around the board that have a number of spots where you can place these discs. And the way those spots are resolved is the discs are flipped over, and whoever has the higher number gets to take the best of the actions or that action at all. So say Neilan, me, and Kalen all have placed tokens on one certain area. Whoever has placed the lowest number will act first, and then say the second number will get something, whatever's left over, but whoever placed the third number will get nothing. So you see somebody place a token out there, and it sort of makes you, you shy away from it, but are they placing their blank token? And there's some brinksmanship, there's some negotiation. You can say you better not place something there, or I'm going to jump out to what I know you want. And just that bluffing aspect is really, really great. I just love that tension. And finally, the way the game is executed once you're flipping these tokens over is just like a very well done Euro. That's where all that building of your engine that you did in the first phase pays off, and that you get that satisfying engine building part that, you know, a person who loves Euro games is striving for. So it has these three aspects of the game that are just beautifully blended. It's a game, again, I don't hear very much about, but I just think works so well. That's my number 3 game, Francis Drake.
I guess I'm a little bit surprised by this one because my only memory of this was we set it up at some point, then someone left and we just teared it straight down.
Right.
So I never actually played it, but I remember you saying you liked it, but I guess I didn't realize how much.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. I mean, I always have such a great experience whenever I play it.
Cool.
So, yeah.
We should try it.
Yeah.
My number 3 game is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar. This is a worker placement game. And one of the things that you'll notice if you were to look at the board, the most striking feature perhaps, are these giant plastic gears that are built into the board. That might seem like a gimmick, but it's actually a really integral part of the game. So there are multiple tracks sort of arranged in circles around each of these gears. There are these smaller gears that are attached to this large central gear. On your turn, you're either going to place workers or pull them off. But when you place them, nothing happens. You're only setting them up for later. Only when you pull them off do you actually get to take their actions. So let's say I place one on this spot on one of the smaller gears. On a later turn, or rather at the end of every single round, the big gear in the middle turns and all of the little tracks, their gears advance. So the actions further along a gear are stronger than the ones earlier. So you might sort of be setting each worker up to come up at a very specific point in a future turn. And that's what the game's all about. It's all about this timing. You're sort of deciding, if I place this guy over here, then 2 turns from now I can pull it off for this action. And then on the 3rd turn I can pull this one off for that action. And you're planning all of this stuff, if you're playing it well at least, you're planning all of this stuff in advance so that in an ideal turn you're placing maybe 2 or 3 different workers just so you can pop them up at the perfect times later in the game. It's really satisfying if you can pull this off. I'm not especially good at it, but it's still incredibly satisfying when you do it just right. It's also the style of game where you have to feed your workers, so you're collecting food. All of this in service of collecting a bunch of victory points through these crystal skulls you're collecting or moving up on these god tracks. So it's got very basic Euro trappings, but the central mechanic is so satisfying just by virtue of the way that all of your workers sort of advance as each turn sort of progresses. It's a really, really cool game. It's one that I find more rewarding the more I play it. That is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar.
Don't want to give this a try. I imagine I will not be good at it with all the future planning that goes on in it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, like even if you're not that good at the forward planning part of it, like I said, I'm not that good at it, I still think that you're going to be able to execute at least one worker into a good position so that 3 turns from now you can pull it off in a good spot. And every time you do that, it still feels good. I think it's one of those games where you play with someone that is really good at it. It's just gut-wrenchingly sort of destroying because it's like, okay, they're just popping off workers and doing these crazy moves. But that aside, if you're playing with people of equal skill, it's really good.
It's one of those games where you shriek, "How efficient of me!" Like in the middle.
Yeah,
of it.
kind of. Yeah, exactly. Like your best moves are just like, "Wow, you executed this perfect little thing. Great, good for you." Yeah.
Woohoo! My number 2 best board game of all time is Archipelago.
My number 6 best game of all time, Archipelago.
Really?
Yeah.
That makes me very happy.
Neilan mentioned it previously?
Yeah, I had it earlier, like around 20 or something.
You know what that means?
Triple crossover.
Yeah.
Archipelago is fantastic, and let me explain it to you very simply. Imagine getting to watch your friend beat you at a Euro efficiency board game where they're gleefully building up some sort of island or collecting resources. They've built an engine that is just superior to yours. And then you get to stop the game and say, "Give me your pineapple or the game's over."
How many times have I heard that?
And if you give me the pineapple, we can continue, but maybe next turn I'll stop the game and we all lose together. Archipelago is a semi-cooperative game. So what that means is that all players can lose. You are colonizing this island as you're exploring and sort of settling there, but the native population can revolt against you if you take too many exploitive actions out in the island. So what that means is a series of crises will happen. And during these crises, the different players will have to contribute different amounts of resources. But if you don't feel like you're going to win the game, you don't want to contribute to that crisis. So you say, well, Neilan, you have to give up your fish. or I have no fish. And even if you do have fish, you can show them your fish and just say, well, I'm unwilling to give them up. and if enough players are unwilling to give them up, the game will end. You'll be 2 hours into the game and no one will win.
You're really selling this.
I love it. I think it's hilarious. It's like trolling almost.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's potential for there to be a hidden traitor. So someone may want that to happen. So there's that natural tension where you say, well, we could all lose, but maybe Christina is screwing with us and she actually wants this to happen. And that's horrifying. Beyond that, it's one of the most beautiful boards I've ever seen as you're exploring this archipelago. What do you guys think of this? It's so, so good.
I love it. I mean, I think it's unlike any game I've ever played. It's like a very unique game for sure. Just to touch on the points you've already touched on, there are things I think are great about it, and then there's just things that I think are just like amazing about it. The things that are great are, like you said, the exploration. You know, you're building an archipelago, so it's really nice to see this board like grow in front of you. You have like it's a very colorful board. You see all those things. The other thing that I think is really great is the market. It does the economic part of it in a very simple but really satisfying way. It's got a domestic market and an international market, and it's just done really interestingly. I really like that. But the thing that it just like sets it apart are the win conditions and victory point conditions. That it's sort of like Trois. You know, everybody gets cards that are going to score victory points for everybody else, but only one person, obviously only a person holding the card knows what the victory point condition is going to be, like Trois. But unlike Trois, they also know what's going to trigger the game end. And I remember when we played it, there's a cheat sheet that has all these cards, and we were passing it around.
Right.
Like, and you know, you're looking at this card, and you're like, all right, so you know, pineapples is one of the end game, and like you look over at Neilan, and he's like,
I'm holding all these
pineapples, right? Yes, that is such an interesting, visceral part of this game, just like that paranoia which you touch on, like, why is he doing this? Why are they building this? And it just, I love it. It's such a unique game.
It's definitely a sort of a very heavy Euro game, but it sort of has this huge sort of social dynamic and tension to it. That's great. It's like this heavy negotiation. It can be mean. I love games that sort of tell good stories, and I feel like every game of Archipelago tells a really cool story at some point. Or all these smaller stories. Like we had our Pineapple Town adventure at one point where I had this sort of massive town that was producing a lot of pineapples for me, and then Kalen steps in and decides, no, I'm the mayor of Pineapple Town. You can't make pineapples anymore.
It's such a silly mechanism that doesn't get used often, but you become the mayor of that town, and even though he's got all the workers there, he can't do anything without my permission, and he's never going to get my permission. And I think the beauty of the production helps sell those stories, and then the social paranoia interaction between the players, just it feels unlike anything else, and that's why Archipelago is my number 2 board game of all time.
It is great. It is undoubtedly a great game. My number 2 game of all time is the type of game that I really gravitate towards. Very simple in terms of the rule set, but very deep in terms of the strategy and the tactics. My number 2 game is Arboretum. Arboretum is just a deck of cards. First of all, it's a beautiful deck of cards. As you may expect from the name Arboretum, you're building an arboretum. That's the conceit of the game. So in lieu of the typical suits that you'd get on cards, the suits here are types of trees. So you have like willow and you have maple, and they're just beautifully illustrated on the cards. There was just a new production of the game, and the illustrations are just gorgeous. But the rule set is very simple. On your turn, you draw 2 cards and play one to your tableau and discard another one. And what you're trying to do in playing a card to your tableau is you're trying to build a string of cards of the same type of tree in order to score that, with hopes of scoring that at the end. So you may want to build a line of maple trees or a line of willow trees or oak trees, whatever, and you're with, again, trying to score oak or maple or whatever at the end of the game. But the way that happens, and this is one of the brutal turns of the game, is you'll only score that tree if at the end of the game you're holding the most points of that tree in your hand. So you start with a small hand of cards, and that hand never increases because you're always drawing 2 cards and using 2 cards. So you only have just a few cards, and you know that if I want to score these oak trees that I've been building, I have to keep some in my reserve, or else Neilan may be able to just by holding 1 card in hand ruin my entire oak line here. So that gets to the discarding part that is also very difficult, because so you're drawing 2 cards, you're playing one, and you're discarding one, But when you discard a card, you're putting into your discard pile, and when a person draws cards, they don't have to draw from the face down draw pile. They can draw from the discard pile. So you're always feeling like when you're discarding that card, you're just going to do exactly what your opponent wants. Like, I know that if I put this oak card down, that's exactly what Kalen needs to, like, you know, get his engine going. I've described it as a game where all you want to do on your turn is pass. You don't want to do anything because you just feel like every choice you make is so brutal, so difficult. And the rule set, again, is very small, but even the small, like, sub rules are just add to that brutality, because the cards go from 1 to 8. There's only, 8 cards per suit. And you may think that holding that 8 card in your hand is going to lock your ability to score a suit because it's the highest number. But in another brutal turn, a 1 card that somebody's holding will cancel out the 8. So if you're holding the 8, but somebody else is holding the 1, your 8 is canceled and that 1 will beat it. So, you're always paranoid. You're always looking at other people's tableaus. You're always trying to remember what was in the discard pile, because is my 8 very valuable, or is it going to be nothing because I haven't seen the 1 come up? Arboretum, just a small deck of cards, but it's such a game of difficult choices. Every play you have is, every choice you make is just brutal. And I just love it. It's just exquisite pain. So my number 2 game of all time is Arboretum.
Cool. My number 2 game of all time. Wait, what was that?
Just Mark is king of the fillers, so we just got to get that out there. That's why we're laughing. The top of his list is full of 20-minute card game.
Right. My number 1 game is a heavy Euro, so I don't know what you're talking
about. Okay, my number 2 game is also a pretty cool little filler. Is Gloomhaven.
Small deck of cards.
Yeah, small deck of cards. Yeah. Perhaps the biggest box I own, actually. It's heavy.
It better be the biggest box. It's like 25 pounds.
Yeah. Gloomhaven is a beast of a game and one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. A little bit of backstory here. I like role-playing games a whole lot in theory. I like video game role-playing games especially. I never really took to Dungeons and Dragons for whatever reason. Just the length of time, the amount of commitment you would need to make that worthwhile just never sat well with me. I played Hero Quest at some point when I was very young, and I always wanted a game that would recreate that sort of experience, and Gloomhaven is absolutely it. It's not a role-playing game. It is a dungeon crawl board game that has a campaign, but oh my god, the amount of stuff that is in this box and the excellence with which it sort of executes on this concept is sort of unlike anything else I've played. At its most basic level, you sort of choose a character, one of a bunch of different characters that plays completely differently. Each of those characters has a deck of cards, which is all of their actions. And on your turn, you're going to choose 2 of those cards and do both the top action of one card and the bottom action of another card. There's also an initiative value associated with each of those cards, so you might want to move quickly at the expense of one action or move slowly at the expense to do another one. And then you just go around the table in initiative order. I go, maybe a monster goes, then another player goes until you've executed all the actions, and you go again. But what's so great about this hand management system is that this deck of cards you have is pretty small. It's only about 10 cards total, and that's all your cards for the total game. So you might play an action that loses a card, and suddenly your deck is that much thinner. It's about managing the amount of time you have left in your deck in order to sort of execute these powerful cards. So if you execute a powerful action early, you just have less time left in the scenario. If you sort of manage your time more effectively, sort of carefully use cards as efficiently as possible, you'll make it to the end of the scenario, but you're not going to be playing as effectively as you could, but you're keeping yourself alive. It's a very clever system for how simple it is. And then all of that is wrapped in this massive campaign that's about 90-something scenarios. It's huge. There's about 20 different characters just in the box. You're unlocking them as you progress in the campaign because it has a bunch of these different, what I call like sort of carrots on the sticks, to use like the video game sort of term. In that you're trying to level up your character, for one thing. You're sort of trying to get new items. There's a personal quest that each character has that you're sort of slowly progressing towards. You're completing scenarios in the form of this long campaign. There are so many sort of small, medium, and long-term goals that every player at the table is working towards, either separately or together, that it's just fantastic. You just want to keep coming back to it. I've played this about 20 or 30 scenarios in now with the group I'm playing it with, and we're barely halfway through it. We've barely scratched the surface. There's still so much more to do. It's crazy.
Yeah. I can't believe there's an expansion coming out.
Yeah. I mean, who finished Gloomhaven?
Yeah,
who has room in their life for that expansion?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like I said, it's a good world-building experience. If you don't have the time or the inclination for like a proper tabletop role-playing system, Gloomhaven is 100% my recommendation as a replacement for it. That is my number 2 game of all time, Gloomhaven.
And it's hard to say that a game that's $100 is like you get bang for your buck.
Oh man, yeah,
but
totally.
you get so much. Bang
That's
for
the
your
thing
buck
is
over
just in terms of like exactly the amount of time and wealth of experience I've gotten out of that $100.
Yeah.
It's money well spent.
Yeah.
I feel like if I bought a PS2 and like 20 RPG games, it'd be cheaper, less heavy, and
How is that fair?
what do you mean?
They're
It's the
not
same-
board games.
Well, is Gloomhaven a board game?
Yes.
All right, who can say?
Yeah, jury's still out. I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, the jury's still out
You
on
might
that.
want to tell BGG since it's like their number 1 game of all time, but it's okay.
Let's just move on to our favorite games. There's no need to defend or try to explain that.
Right.
Well, here we are, guys.
This is it.
Number
We are
Number
there.
one.
Number 1.
Man, we've been
Number
here
1.
so long in this studio. I'll go first. First
Yep.
is best.
First is the worst. Second is the best.
Oh, well,
So
second is the best. I don't think that's
You ever
ever
heard that?
been.
First is the worst. Second is the best. Third is the one with the hairy chest. I don't
Yeah.
know about Neilan, but that's what this
Accurate.
We're cutting that out. All right. My number 1 favorite board game of all time is Innovation. This is a small card game designed by Karl Chudyk, and it favors heavily tactics over long-term strategy. That's something you'll see predominantly through my list. Innovation is a game where you will constantly be drawing cards that distill sort of the civilization style cards. So you'll be drawing cards like the wheel or arithmetic or different things, and that has a unique power associated with it. And you're building a tableau in front of you and spamming combos between your cards to try to outscore your opponents. Every game, you will discover a new synergy between cards that you didn't know existed before. Every game, you will frequently scream that your opponents have combos that seem broken or unfair. And that's sort of how Karl Chudyk balances his games. Everything is unfair. Everything feels broken. And it's hilarious. You're sort of skipping through the ages. There's age 1, which is the prehistoric age, all the way through age 10, where you have cards like the internet. Innovation feels like the best way to describe it is this rocket ship where you find a synergy between 2 cards and you hit that button and you fly up in your rocket ship, but a piece of your ship falls off because you have to discard a card to get there. And then it gets through your opponent's turn and you realize you can hit the button again. You can score more points, and you're kind of close to winning, so you hit it again and again and again, and you just desperately are hoping that you're going to win the game before your ship just is nothing, before you have no ship.
Right.
It always feels desperate and hopeless, and there's a back and forth, a tug of war that really goes back and forth the entire game. This is primarily played for me at 2 players. I think it's also good at 3. At 4, I prefer the 2 versus 2 variant. There's a ton of expansions for this game. It's literally $15. You don't need any of the expansions. I have played so many games of Innovation. It's so fun. It's so silly. It's so wacky. But the better player does win the game most of the time, and I think that's important. Innovation is so clever and interesting. One of my favorite things is how you can get up to a later age and then somehow an older card of yours gets exposed and suddenly you're using archery to defeat someone who's got the internet. And you've got monotheism that becomes uncovered and somehow is destroying someone with combustion engines. It's so great. I really love Innovation. I know we've had some fun games of it together, but
Yeah, I love, like you said, the civilization building of it. You know, the fact that somebody has like the Stone Age and like is doing space travel, like just that.
Yeah.
You get that vibe. You get that like that interesting vibe. And like you said, the best part is that hitting the button thing. You get these 2 cards and you realize there's just like this incredible combo that seems game breaking, and so you hit it. And then, yeah, you just like that. Like you said, the rocket ship is like disintegrating, and you're just desperate. Can I get one more push out of this? And yeah, just that incredible comboing is fantastic.
it can be very cruel. It can be very mean. Your opponent knows that you can just keep doing that same thing over and over again, and you just have to keep doing it. That is Innovation, my favorite board game of all time.
It also has a thing that I like about Dominion, which I described, where, like in a collectible card game, it's finding those sort of valuable combos, but in an emergent way. Like, you just pick up this card, and you're not quite sure how it's going to be useful, but then you see another card in your tableau. It's like, oh, this is perfect with this. And just discovering those in the course of the game naturally is always satisfying.
Or you draw a card and you think it's trash, and then 10 games later you draw it again, and it's the savior of that game.
And you realize
for you.
why, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what could my number 1 game be?
Wow, dramatic.
It's Biblios. What else is it going to be?
Huh.
We thought this
If you-
was a joke, Mark.
If you don't know about Biblios, I would have you listen to any podcast that we've done because I bring it up all the time because it is the best game of all time. Do you want drafting? You got drafting. Do you want auction? You got auction.
Do you want your notes back?
I got it all here. I know Biblios. Hand management. Press your luck. Set collection. 45 minutes. Small box.
Monks.
Plays 2. Plays 3. Plays 4. Beautifully. 45 minutes, you're done. Small box. What? You don't have room in your house for a small box? I don't even have a house. I live in a gymnasium. I still play Biblios. Get Biblios. What are you doing? If you don't have Biblios, Neilan will be here in a second. Pause this. Buy Biblios. Come back and watch whatever Neilan says for the number one game. But it doesn't matter because you'll have the number one game of all time, which is Biblios. Get it. It's fantastic. I just threw my papers up in the air because I have unbridled enthusiasm for Biblios. Get it? It's fantastic. Done. Biblios.
Biblios is a pretty good game.
No triple crossover for Biblios, which is a crime.
Was it on your list, Neil?
Yeah,
Yes,
it was.
it was.
Yeah.
Of course it was.
It
But
was
he's
very
just
close.
humoring you.
Yeah.
He doesn't mean it.
I threw my papers towards Neilan in celebration.
Oh, that wasn't over here. But I thought we like high fived and stuff.
That's not the same
Didn't
as
get a paper
celebratory-
celebration.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, my number one, the actual best game of all time, is
got a
recovering
camera,
paper.
yeah,
Is The Resistance. I love The Resistance. We were talking about bang for buck. I've played more games of The Resistance than any other game, hands down. It's incredible. It's a social deduction game that's incredibly simple to explain. Basically, the players divide into two teams. One team are the spies, the other team are the resistance. The spies will sort of know who each other are. Everyone will close their eyes and the spies will open them and sort of acknowledge each other. The resistance don't know anything. They don't know who's on their team. They don't know who's a spy. Then you have a series of 5 missions. So each mission, you have a team leader. They'll pick a number of people to go on that mission. So I might say, okay, I'm definitely taking myself. Mark and Kalen, you're coming with me. And then we all vote. We either hate that mission because someone's like, no, Mark's a spy. He's not coming on the mission. Then we turn it down. We go to the next mission. I choose someone else. Mark chooses someone else. And then that mission goes through. And if that mission happens, then each of the players is going to submit either a success or a fail card. If any one of the cards that comes up as a fail, the mission fails and the spies get a point. Otherwise, the resistance get a point. First team to 3 points wins the game. That's basically all the rules of resistance right there. It's so easy to explain. It's maybe not going to go great the first time you play it, but everyone will pick it up by the end of the first game and want to play it immediately afterwards. It's a game about lying, deception, bluffing. It's fantastic. You're going to be shouting at each other frantically. You're going to be sort of corralling people to your team. It's just a game that sort of rewards the people that you play with every single time. It's so good. It's so different every single time you play it. Even if you're not sort of changing up that much about the rule set every time, just the combination of people and just sort of the small little microcosms of like lying and deception will change it up every single time. That said, my sort of preference for playing Resistance is with the sort of the Avalon sort of variant, or if you have the base game of Resistance, this is in the Hidden Agenda, the Assassination module. This adds one player to the spy team that's trying to kill another player on the Resistance team. That player knows who all the spies are. Right. So that resistance player will sort of know who the spies are and can use that to their advantage. But if the spies figure out who that player is, then they win the game. So it adds this little layer of hidden information that just makes the game that much more brilliant in my eyes. You're sort of trying to work in the information subtly without sort of giving it away. It's really, really good. There are a bunch of different variants that sort of come through in the expansions that change it up in subtle ways. I don't think you can go wrong however you choose to play it. It's incredible.
Resistance was my number 8 best game of all time. I think when it came out, it was revelatory for distilling Werewolf and removing the need to have a moderator. And now it is the social deduction game that all others are sort of based off of, essentially. Even Secret Hitler, I believe, to be almost just a variant of Resistance. My personal preference is base Resistance with potentially the plot thicken cards if you're looking for LOL randomness added into it. Avalon gets a little bit too deduction for me, but I think that's the power of the system is you can, for me, the lying, the deception, and the emotion is the fun part of it. I think with Avalon, you add more of real deduction to the equation, and that appeals to many, many gamers. This is just a fantastic social experience. In many ways, like Diplomacy, but 30 minutes instead of 12 hours.
I think the thing that, like you said, like other games, I mean, there are a lot of social deduction games in the space, and they keep layering on these mechanics, but there's something about the purity and the simplicity of the Resistance that, like I said, I just keep coming back to. It leans on nothing but the social dynamic, I think, because the rule set's as simple as it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys said it's the game that other social deduction games are based off
Yeah.
of. But it's also, to me, it's the game that other social deduction games should be like judged by. It's sort of, for me, like the bar is this anywhere near as good a social deduction game as Resistance? And that's sort of like the criteria that I come up with.
Like, you've added stuff, but have you improved
right,
on
exactly,
Resistance?
right.
Yeah.
Which is probably no. The answer is probably no to that.
It's usually no.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That is my number one game of all time, The Resistance.
We did it.
That's going to do it. That's it.
Wow.
Yep.
30
been a long
long-ish
road.
fantastic games. Yeah.
Yep.
More than that if you've been listening to the entire series. Thank you all so much for listening. If you've listened to every episode of the show, this has been our top 50 games of all time. If this you're coming into the top 10 and this is your first look, please go back and listen to all the other episodes.
That's right. Multiple times.
Yeah,
preferably.
just keep doing it. Tell all your friends. Just keep clicking that button, replay, get to the end, restart it.
right.
Why not?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Otherwise, as always, for on YouTube, like, sharing, and subscribing is hugely significant for us. So please do that. Otherwise, please tell your friends about us. Like I said at the top of the show, we're primarily a podcast. If you've liked what you've been watching or listening to, please go back and listen to the podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play. Otherwise, we're on all social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Reach out to us. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. As always, thank you to Heart Society for our intro and outro music, What's on Your Mind, Kid? You can check them out at heartsocietymusic.com. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
See ya.
So long.
I'm high. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself.
My number 10 game of all time is Dominion. This is the original deck building game. The premise of this is
TM, the original
Exactly,
deck builder.
The tagline,
Yeah.
Dominion, the original deck building game.